Hey there, I'm just a guy having fun at the range. Let's go shoot something. So for this video I decided to go through what I call the caliber experience. So there's a lot of different calibers out there, different size bullets that different guns shoot. 22 long rifle, 9mm, 45 ACP are the most popular. But I wanted to go through kind of the majority of the handgun cartridges out there, at least the ones that I brought with me today. So I'll just show you what we're looking at here real quick. So these are all the calibers that we're going to run through today. So starting from left to right, so we've got a 22 long rifle and a 22 Magnum, a 380 ACP, a 9mm, a 357 SIG, a 40 cal, a 10mm, a 45 ACP, and then going to the revolver cartridges, 38 Special, 357 Magnum, 44 Special, and a 44 Magnum. So I brought a selection of handguns out with me today that we're just going to shoot just a couple of rounds of each of these different calibers so that you can kind of see what the differences are. So I'll run through them real quick. This is a Luger SR22 chambered in 22 long rifle, followed by a Kel-Tec PMR 30 and 22 Magnum, a Glock 42 in 380 ACP, a Glock 48 in 9mm, a PF 940 CL in 357 Magnum. Then I've got a Glock 23 hiding back there. Glock 23 in 40 cal, a Glock Model 40 in 10mm, and then a Glock 21 in 45 ACP. So the upper there, I'll just put that on the lower of my Model 40. And then a Smith & Wesson Model 27 in 38 and 357 Magnum, and a Smith & Wesson 629 in 44 Special, 44 Magnum. So that's what we're going to be shooting today. All right, let's go ahead and get started off. First things first, so this is a Luger SR22 in 22 long rifle. So nice and easy shooting with that 22 long rifle, very small caliber compared to the other stuff. So we're going to move up now. This is a 22 Magnum, so it's the same diameter as the 22 long rifle that we just shot, but a lot more powder behind it and a lot more power behind it. So we're shooting this out of a Kel-Tec PMR 30. Let's see if we can hit something with this guy. And safety's off. Okay. So not too bad. Again, you know, more power than the 22 for sure. There's quite a blast off of this guy, but still not too bad. Still a very mild caliber, but more than the 22 long rifle. Now, the next one that we're moving into, so this is a 380 ACP. This is a Glock 42 shooting 380 ACP. So now the bullet diameter is significantly different. It's a 9mm or about a 35 caliber if you wanted to put some real dimensions on it. So 380 ACP, it's technically a 38 caliber, but the reality is the bullet diameter is closer to 35. So a larger diameter bullet, a heavier bullet almost by 3 times, moving a little bit slower. So it has about the same power as the 22 Magnum, but just in a different package. So you'll notice it gets that plate swinging a little bit more. That's not because it necessarily has more kinetic energy, but because you got a heavier bullet that's hitting that plate, it's going to swing it a little bit more because of the momentum, the inertia, all that maintained energy because of the mass, more than the 22. The 22 just kind of splatters on there, and a lot of that energy is lost off to the side. So moving up from a 380 is a 9mm, so same diameter bullet as the 380 ACP. A little bit heavier bullet, but now moving a lot faster. And so now we get more energy than the 22 Magnum, more than the 380. Everything's going to be more from here on out. But the 9mm is kind of what people consider the minimum for a self-defense caliber. This is kind of the first real caliber that people like to talk about. 380 doesn't quite cut it. So here's a 9mm. So again, it's getting that plate swinging a bit more than the 380, still manageable. I can keep it on one plate and let that plate swing back and forth, and it's not too bad. So this next one, 357 SIG, now this is a 9mm bullet, but now it's traveling even faster. So about the velocity difference between a 380 and a 9 is the velocity difference between a 9 and a 357 SIG. Now this is out of a 6-inch barrel, so it kind of gives the 357 SIG its maximum performance. And let's just see what it does to some of those plates down there. So you'll notice that guy is really swinging. Really swinging. So that's hitting it with a ton more power, and all that power is coming from the velocity of the round. It's about the same weight as the 9mm that I was just shooting. I think those were 115, they might have been 124, but they're probably 115 grain 9mm. This is 124 grain 357 SIG, so not that much of a weight difference, but you get so much more velocity out of that 357 SIG. It really moves those plates around quite a bit. So up next is a Glock 23 in 40 cal. So now we're jumping up from a 9mm to a 10mm or a 40 caliber, from a 35 to a 40 caliber bullet. So heavier bullet, 180 grains, moving slightly slower than the 9mm, but you've got the mass there that kind of balances it out. So the power is pretty close between the 9 and the 40, but it feels completely different because you've got a heavy bullet going a little bit slower versus a light bullet going faster. The heavier the bullet is, the more felt recoil you're usually going to have. Velocity tends to be more snap, and the mass tends to be more push. So here's a 40 caliber on those plates down there. So really smacking those plates, and a lot of that has to do with the mass. The amount of lead that's actually smacking into it is going to not disintegrate as easily, so it's going to push that plate a little bit more. But again, a little bit more power there than the 9mm. Less than the 357 SIG because it doesn't have the velocity advantage, but more than a 9mm. So now we're going to move up to the 10mm, which is a 40 Magnum, or if you know the history, the 10mm actually came first, and the 40 Smith & Wesson is kind of a light 10mm. So this is a full power 10mm, same exact bullet, so same 40 caliber, 180 grain bullet, but now it's moving faster, closer to the velocity of that 357 SIG, and that velocity is going to give it a bit more power. Now, I'm shooting it out of a larger package, so the felt recoil doesn't feel nearly as bad, going from a compact 40 to this full-size 10mm, but the round is still quite potent. So let's see what we can do to those plates with a 10mm. Oh, I flinched on that last one. And she's staying open. Goes, got hung up on something. Okay, so that's a 10mm. Now I should comment that the swinging of the plate isn't a perfect indicator of how much power is hitting the plate, because it all depends on where I hit the plate. If I'm hitting the top edge of the plate, the amount of energy that's going into that plate is going to make it swing less because of the leverage that that plate is getting hit with, as opposed to hitting it near the bottom of the plate. If I hit it near the bottom of the plate, it's going to make that plate swing a ton. So if you're saying, oh, the plates are swinging about the same with all these different rounds, well, the reality is it might just be where I'm hitting it. Or, I might hit it just perfectly with a 9mm at the bottom edge, but my 10mm is hitting up at the top. So it's not a perfect measure of energy, and that's not what I'm trying to demonstrate here. More just trying to run through the common calibers, talk a little bit about them, so that you can see them shot. So this is a 45 caliber, this is a Glock 21. So 45, is double the mass of a 9mm, but significantly slower than a 9mm. So these are 230 grain bullets. They're moving 800, 900 feet per second, so they're subsonic. So they're moving slow, but they've got a lot of mass to them. So they still hit with a considerable amount of energy, not quite as much as the 10mm, but still quite a lot of energy. And I should have memorized my foot-pounds of muzzle energy for all these different calibers before I made this video. You can look them up online. I mean, they're even on Wikipedia if you want to look. The different muzzle energies of these different rounds. Different loads will vary depending on the velocity and the mass of the actual projectile used, but typically the bigger the bullet, the more power it is. There's a couple of exceptions to that with the 10mm 357 SIG, but in general, the bigger it is, the more power it has. All right, let's put some 45 calibers on these plates. So that's the 45 ACP. It's more pushy in my opinion. You know, it's not as snappy as the 40. There's definitely more energy there, but you don't get it kind of all at once. It's more of this nice push. And in part that's the spring system and the recoil of the slide that's kind of giving you that energy in a different curve rather than the 40, which essentially just, you know, the slide rips all the way to the rear and then you get all of that snap. The 45 is much longer push and then you kind of get it. So I like shooting 45. It's kind of soft. It's expensive to shoot these days compared to 9mm or 22. It's not terrible, but it's not my favorite thing to shoot, but I don't mind shooting it at all. Alright, so that's it for the semi-automatic cartridges. Let's go ahead and move into the revolvers. So I've got a Smith & Wesson Model 27 here. I'm going to put some 38s and 357s in it just for the sake of time. So I'm just going to put 3 of the Magnums. I thought those were specials. Those are the Magnums. Let's see here. These guys are 38 specials. So I'll put 3 of the 38 specials and then it'll transition right into the Magnums. Goodness. So you'll get to see the difference. So the 38 special is kind of like a 9mm, somewhere between a 380 and a 9mm, depending on the load that you get, whether it's a heavier bullet or a plus P round, which means higher pressure, higher velocity. So it's somewhere between a 380 and a 9mm, the 38 special. Same diameter, or pretty close to the same diameter as the 9 and the 380s. The 357 Magnum, however, is, again, it's got a lot more velocity. It's 1,300, 1,400 feet per second as opposed to less than 1,000 feet per second. So a lot more velocity, which translates to a lot more energy. So you'll see the difference just in the recoil of the firearm. Hopefully we'll see some difference in how it hits the plate as well. So here's a 38 special. And here's a 357 Magnum. That last one I think kind of showed you how much more energy there is in the 38 or in the 357 as opposed to the 38. So that's 38 357 Magnum, and so that 357 Magnum, of course, is what the 357 SIG was designed to replicate. So shooting that 357 SIG out of the semi-automatic, very similar to the 357 Magnum. But I think the 357 SIG is significantly more manageable. The recoil in the semi-automatic is just different than in a revolver. Okay, so we've got now the 44 Special 44 Magnum Model 629. So I'm just going to put in, we'll put in 2 of the specials, and then I'll put in 4 of the standard Magnums. So the 44 Special is kind of like a 45 ACP. It's a 44 caliber rather than a 45. It's about the same weight. I think these are 240 grain as opposed to the 230 grain of the 45. Moving about the same speed. But out of a nice big heavy revolver like this, they feel like you're shooting next to nothing. But you're hitting with about the energy of a 45 ACP. Okay, so those are 44 Specials. Now the 44 Magnum, again, it's got more powder behind it. It's got a higher velocity, and that velocity is going to translate to more muzzle energy. and in this case a lot more felt recoil. So here's a 44 Magnum, which until the advent of the 50 AE and the 460 Smith & Wesson and the 500 Magnum, the 480 Ruger, this was considered the most powerful handgun cartridge. And then of course we had to make it bigger. There's a 44 Magnum, goodness sakes. See, I'm having trouble keeping that muzzle down. I'm fighting that with all I've got. I think I'm out. Yep, I'm out. Okay, so 44 Magnum is quite the powerhouse. I kind of want to shoot a few more of those just for the fun of it. Let's shoot a couple more. I'm warming up on those guys. So 44 Magnum, I'm just going to put 6 more in. Because why not? See if I can keep that muzzle flipped down at all. Alright, I'm going for muzzle control on this one. See if we can keep it down. For goodness sakes, it is a lot of power. Asking, so how am I trying to fight that recoil? Well, the wrong way to fight recoil is to dip the gun down right at the last second as the bullet's going off. That's not what I'm trying to do, and that's not going to help you at all. So the way that I'm fighting that recoil is with a push and a pull. So I'm pushing with my right hand as hard as I can, pulling back with my left hand and kind of favoring the bottom of the grip as I'm pushing against that, try and give myself some leverage to fight that recoil. But the whole idea is locking this thing in a vise. Okay, I'm not squeezing, I'm not gripping hard with my hands. It's all about this push-pull. As much as I can push out towards the gun, pull back with my left hand, get that thing in a vise. And I'm starting to get it a little bit closer to what I wanted. I'm going to aim for that 4-inch plate. Hope I don't hit the edge of my target stand. Ah, goodness sakes. All right. So that's 6. So that's 44 Magnum, the most powerful handgun cartridge until they came out with a more powerful one. I think 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum kind of takes the cake right now for most powerful handgun cartridge. But I'm sure that they will come out with something larger someday in the future. So anyway, hope you enjoyed that. I'm just a guy having fun at the range, and that was the Caliber experience.